Yeah. So I'm back with another video, and yes, I'm still talking about the Pop Out Ken and Friends concert because not only is it fascinating to me, but also, in my opinion, it's brought up so many questions in hip hop that I think many people are too distracted to ask or just simply aren't thinking about right now. And one major question that I had that I wanted to make the topic of this video is: did Kendrick Lamar unintentionally just reset hip hop and make way for like a changing of the guard and for a new big three? Uh, Now, the reason I say that is Kendrick is undoubtedly the king of the West Coast. Like it's undeniable at this point. And also at this point, you might as well just call him overall the king of hip hop at this point, whether you like it or not. Again, whether you like it or not, whether people like it or not, he has cleared the table. And just like he said on the Like That song, fuck the big three, it's just big me. Like he's on the mountaintop now. Like it is what it is. He's the last man standing. When you think about that last generation that he comes from, he is the last man standing in a sense. I'm gonna get to that later, but yeah, basically he's the last man standing. So, he has the classics, he has the hit songs, he has the cultural impact, and then he also just won in a battle. So he's succeeded in all phases of hip hop at a high level, obviously. But I think people need to remember that Kendrick is not an artist who's gonna drop once a year or twice a year or anything like that. Even if he drops this year, we all know he's gonna go MIA for anywhere from 2 to 5 plus years, and that would leave a major vacancy at this point. I think at this point he's kind of cemented his legacy, and I doubt he's going to be like super invested in trying to really go on a crazy run because he may not feel the need to. So I want people to kind of look at it like this to see where I'm coming from with this and just follow me here. Like, I want to make an analogy comparing hip hop to the NBA. So this year's NBA playoffs was a very important one, whether people realize it or not. It was extremely important. So this year in the NBA playoffs, this was an undeniable changing of the guard within basketball, within the NBA. Most of the legends that we grew up watching, or at least I grew up watching, and people of my age range, we grew up watching in our childhood, growing up in the 2000s and early 2010s. Most of them are gone at this point. The only ones left are now clearly on their last leg, and it's kind of hard to watch because they're clearly halfway out the door at this point. I mean, you look around, like KD is still a good scorer, but he's getting older and he's on another team that's, even though it got a lot of hype, is struggling and they got bounced out of the first round. LeBron can still score and pass and play at a high level, but his athleticism is clearly diminishing. He at best, he might have 1 to 2 more good years left in him. Uh, who else? Bradley Beal's washed. Who else? Klay Thompson is washed. Steph Curry can still play, but with Klay Thompson now becoming washed and Draymond, he's like going crazy and he's in and out trying to get into a media career. It's pretty much Steph by himself there. And at this point in Steph's career, even though he could score, he can't really carry a whole roster by himself. Like you still have Kyrie and Al Horford. They're in the finals. I mean, they were in the finals, but Kyrie came up short, and there's no guarantee that Dallas is going to want to keep him long term at this point. And Al Horford, now that Al Horford has finally got a ring, he's probably going to want to, call it a day and just retire any day now. Any day within the next year or so, he's probably going to just call it a day and just, hang it up once and for all and retire. So my point is, the older generation of basketball players who got drafted during the 2000s and 2010s, they've reached a point where they've either retired or they are on the brink of retiring because they simply can't keep up with the new generation. Anthony Edwards, when you think about some of the newer generation basketball players like Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, Jaylen Brown, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Brunson. The next generation, they're here in full force. They're all, getting ready to enter their prime now, and they've come on like a tidal wave. and they've taken full control of the league this year. Like, and you saw that in the playoffs where all of those older players that I mentioned, they either missed the playoffs altogether, or they got kicked out, or they got kicked out of the playoffs relatively early, like in the first round. So how does this relate to hip hop? Well, we got to go back and look at the generation of rap that popped off in the late 2000s and early 2010s, because that's where Kendrick Lamar came from. Now, obviously, like I said earlier, Kendrick Lamar has the keys to hip hop, but at this point in his career, he's not realistically going to go on like a prolific run where he's going to do 100 features and put out his best album. Like, that's unrealistic. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think he's gonna put out dope projects and have some dope features. But again, we have to be realistic here. At this point in his career, is he gonna put out an album as good as Section 80 or Good Kid, Mad City or Damn or To Pimp a Butterfly? Probably not. That's a pretty that's a high mark to reach. And even though he might do something close, it's realistically not gonna get to that point. Is what I'm saying. So, and I have to say this because when somebody is in a position Kendrick is in, where he's just eliminated the whole competition, usually you would expect maybe for them to go on a crazy run to really cement themselves as that guy. Like, think about like the prime of Lil Wayne, where he was coming out saying, "Hey, he's the best rapper alive." He put out that song "Best Rapper Alive" on the Carter 2, and then he went on a crazy mixtape run and a crazy feature run. I don't think Kendrick's going to do that at this point. Maybe he will, but it's unlikely that he will. But when you look at somebody else from who was a part of what was called the Big Three, like Drake musically peaked like 9 years ago. If we're being honest, like you could say his musical peak was maybe 2009 to 2015 when he dropped "If You're Reading This, It's Too Late." And on top of that, with the losses Drake has taken to Kendrick Lamar and Pusha T, and with all the reference tracks that have leaked and all the other stuff outside of music and all this stuff that's happened, his legacy's been severely damaged. So at this point, it's not even clear where he's gonna go from here. Plus, his last few albums, like I said, they've been duds creatively. Like, he's past his musical peak. It is what it is. So J. Cole, he's still around and he's still dope, but unfortunately, he dropped a pretty bad verse over that Cash Cobain song, so that's kind of not looking good for him. But him, J. Cole releasing and then reneging, like him releasing and then taking back his Kendrick diss, I believe was a major blow to his legacy. Plus, at this point, I don't think J. Cole is that interested in trying to go on a crazy run of features and album drops again. He's already going on a crazy run of features, and he's still dropping albums, like, obviously, but like, he's still in a different point of his career, is what I'm saying. He's not like at the apex of his creativity, or at the apex of the cultural zeitgeist. Like, just he's not in the midst of what would be considered the new school or stuff that's like super relevant to today's kids who consume mainstream music. Now, that's just the guys who emerged from that era. When I mentioned Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole just now, those are just the guys who, in hindsight, emerged from that era and ended up being called the Big Three. But we have to remember, at the time in the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was a whole crop of people. It wasn't just these three guys, really. It was debatable at one point. It really was debatable. It was just a massive tidal wave of artists. Just like with the NBA right now, we are seeing a massive tidal wave of younger stars who are now taking over, like the Anthony Edwards and Luka Doncic and all of those guys, Jalen Brunson taking over. In the 2010s, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, in music, you had people like Wale and Big Sean and Big Crit, ASAP Rocky, Wiz Khalifa, Meek Mill, Mac Miller, YG, Nipsey Hussle. Even on the underground level, you had like Dom Kennedy, XV. You had Kid Ink and Mark Battles and Hopsin and Dizzy Wright and Yellow Wolf and Machine Gun Kelly, and all these people. It's a long list of people, but again, now all of those people I just named, that they're considered at this point part of like an older generation because time has passed. So you think about Wale's still doing his thing, but again, I don't even know if Wale signed anymore actually. But either way, he's not. He doesn't have that same. He doesn't have that same buzz he had 10, 15 years ago because the fans have kind of moved on. Well, the general public outside of his core fans have moved on, or the label had stopped putting money in him, or a combination of both. Same thing happened with Big Sean. He's still putting music out, but the wave isn't as big as before. Big Crit, similar. He's still putting music out, but then also Big Crit went independent a couple years ago, so that also affects how much attention he can realistically get. Even though, ironically, I think a lot of Big Crit's best music came after he left Def Jam, but that's a different conversation. ASAP Rocky, he was never that serious about music in general. Like he dropped some dope stuff, but then half the time he wanted to be a fashion model, so it don't really matter. And again, so on and so forth. When you go down a list of these artists from that era, a lot of them have come and gone for different reasons. Some might have passed away, like Mac Miller, or some might have just kind of really fallen back, like any of these guys I've listed. Or some of them may have never stopped releasing music, but the wave they had in the 2010s, it kind of slowed up. It kind of started to fizzle out a little bit, and now it's outside of their core following. They're not getting a whole lot of attention anymore. But so again, I'm just trying to make the point that there is a changing of the guard most likely happening, where you're gonna probably have an incoming wave of artists who either we've never heard of or who may have been around already, but they're still new enough to become the new leaders of the new school, if that makes sense. I don't really have anybody in my mind that I think is like a guarantee to fit that description. But in the thumbnail of this video, I just decided I was gonna put Gunna, Central C, and Roddy Rich on the list, just because I think those are three interesting names to bring up. Like Gunna has really pulled off what might be one of the most impressive comebacks in hip hop history. Like his comeback when it comes to the snitching allegations and all of that stuff, his comeback might be almost as impressive as Tiger's comeback from a few years ago. So I think, I'm not saying he's going to be, I'm not saying these guys are the new big three, but I'm just saying we have to start now keeping in mind who may be a part of what's considered that newer crop of artists who carry the torch. Central C he's a very interesting case, obviously coming out of the UK. A lot of Americans have kind of been gravitated towards him, which is interesting to see for me. I'm cool with it. I'm happy about it just because it's cool to see more people be open minded. Like I remember in the 2000s and 2010s when when I would listen to artists like Dizzy Rascal or Tiny Temper, where at that time, especially in New York, like people would really clown you. Nobody really wanted to hear anybody from the UK with that accent rap. Like people were very closed minded compared to now, where there's still a lot of closed minded people, and I might make a separate video about that. I feel like a lot of people are kind of foolishly getting left behind because they don't want to adapt and be open minded. But still, nonetheless, you're seeing him gain a massive wave, not just in the UK, but even across America. In the case of Roddy Rich, he's already been around for a few years, but he's still relatively young. And on top of that, because a lot of people feel like he fell off, but he's still a talented artist who may very well just make a very fierce comeback in the near future. But I also wanted to talk about like what will the criteria be for the next crop of artists who are going to compete to be in that big three debate, or that like next generation leader of the new schools conversation. I'm interested to see what the criteria is going to be, because what's helping artists blow up and maintain in this generation is much different than what was popping or what was the way to go during the late 2000s and early 2010s when Kendrick and the rest of these guys had initially blown up. At that time, all those guys had to really do was just make some music and being good with like the people that run the blogs, and that would really be enough for them to kind of figure things out, go on tour, stuff like that. outside of Wiz Khalifa, none of these other guys that I listed at that time were going out of their way to do any sort of other type of content beyond the music. Like Wiz Khalifa has always been vlogging, but outside of him, nobody else was really doing it like that. But in this era, it's a completely different ball game because now a lot of artists are becoming content creators overall, where in addition to releasing their music, they're trying to find other ways to develop an audience, like cultivate an audience, and then also maintain that audience. You're seeing people like T Grizzly. He's gotten really big into live streaming, playing, video games on Twitch like Grand Theft Auto. A lot of artists now are putting out podcasts, and so I'm very interested to see what's the criteria going to be as far as, can you simply just be a rapper who drops one album every 2 years or every 5 years and then vanishes, or can you be an artist who, or do you have to be an artist who, in addition to rapping, you're doing podcasts or different sort of shows that might relate to other interests you have, like cooking or sports or whatever, or like, or live streaming or whatever the case may be, and then also even stylistically, what's the next criteria going to be? Is it going to be a heavy push for, or a heavy demand for a lot of street artists, or is it going to be, or is it going to go back into more of like a very alternatives, like maybe is it going to go back to artists who have more of an alternative appeal, or is it going to go back to artists who may be more in that sort of boy next door sort of vibe, where they're just regular, guys who just have a specific perspective on certain things? So I'm interested to see what comes out of this, but let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think that Kendrick unintentionally just cleared the table and just left a major vacancy for the new artists to carry the torch, and let there be a changing of the guard? Or do you think that the artists that we've already come to know, like the Kendricks and J. Cole's and all these other people, Future and all of them, do you think they are going to still be the guys who just dominate everything for the next 10 years?